We're
It's
live.
live. All right.
Hey.
Pardon the delay. I think we were both trying to figure out how LinkedIn works. How you doing, Matt?
Yeah. So does it look like it's showing up in LinkedIn?
I'm attending it, which is I find really interesting on LinkedIn when you say you're attending something. It lets
Oh,
everybody know that you're attending and ask, hey Matt, would you like to join the thing that Ryan's attending? So I did that. We'll see what happens, but it said it would pop up live.
do
I'll look at
you
my phone in a second.
do you actually? Oh, I see it. Matt Williams is live right now. Wow.
Holy moly! Do you know Matt Williams?
Wow. What do I do?
He's not in your
Hold on.
network. LinkedIn's so funny.
Except I better
I
pause it so
think
I'm not.
Yeah, so you don't hear the double thing. I think LinkedIn is, maybe this is like a hot take, but I think LinkedIn is the right place for a lot of these kind of, I don't know, just random tech podcast kind of stuff. I think that's the right place for it. Whether or not
Right.
this specifically will succeed on LinkedIn, we shall
Yeah.
see. Because I think
Yeah.
most of video content, people go to YouTube to find it. That's where they're looking for stuff.
Right. Yeah. I definitely go to a lot. I mean, so actually there was this argument on the this discussion on
Discussion.
the evangelist, not evangelist Slack. Now
Oh,
it's
the DevRel
developer
Slack?
advocate, DevRel Slack. It was originally the evangelist Slack,
Right.
and then they renamed it. About where's the best place to put live content. Where
Right.
if you're streaming, where do you put it? Do you put it on Twitch, or do you put it on YouTube? And the argument for some people for Twitch was exactly the same argument for other people to put it on YouTube, and that's because the other platform makes it really hard to find stuff, whereas the platform they prefer makes it a lot
Interesting.
easier to find stuff.
Interesting. I mean, it sounds like the preferred platform of the user, right? I think that's maybe
Yeah.
what you're getting at.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do find
I
discovery
mean,
on Twitch very difficult for me, but also when I go to Twitch, I'm looking for something specific. We may have lost Matt there. I'll keep talking though. The reason why we're using YouTube is I think both of us find this a little bit more easy to find. There he is.
hey,
Just
I,
little monologue there. But do you
I did
find discovery
the
on YouTube easy?
I went back. I did the
Uh-oh.
backspace in my browser, and it's
Oh,
like,
no.
oh, you've just left.
do you find YouTube easier for discoverability? Because I certainly do.
I do.
By fair
And I
margin.
think recently they made some changes to the platform that makes finding live stuff easier again. So
Right. Especially if you already follow the person. So I subscribe
right.
to your channel. I know you've probably heard the meme of like and subscribe. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I've liked it. I've definitely subscribed. and I
don't
haven't
like
hit
my
the
stuff.
I may not even have hit the bell icon, but having just subscribed, I do get notified when you're going live, which is kind of cool. Yeah, I'm bad at following instructions. It's hard.
Yeah.
But I do feel like at one point in time, YouTube did have a discoverability issue, and that's why people had to remind their users, or their viewers, hey, do all three of these things, because otherwise you're not going to know when I've got new content out. And that definitely did happen for the longest time. So I would have to look for things that I would know that were happening on a Friday afternoon, for example. Linus Tech Tips, let's be honest, that live stream during COVID, I kind of got through it just watching those two. They're local, just talking about random stuff. Don't always agree with them, but it is fun to watch, to have something scheduled. However, YouTube would never notify me it was live, so I'd have to consistently search throughout the night to find it. It's not a big deal. I mean, we're talking Friday during it, not lockdown, but you're at home, you're not doing much, so it was pretty easy to find. But YouTube discoverability certainly did take a hit during COVID, and maybe they fixed it. I don't know.
Yeah, I want to say that generally things are easier to find. Yeah, and the folks who said that things are just easier to find on Twitch, I don't understand that. And they show me like, well, just look for this. I was like, okay,
right. Just type in this crafted
specific special channel or group to search for, which of course is not listed anywhere.
Yeah, so there's like a tech evangelist group that I'm part of, and I will have people like host my stream and stuff like that. I don't know, I stream frequently, which is cool, and I'll try to host other people's stream and stuff like that. But I think they've turned off that feature as well, to like host someone else's stream in your channel, which did actually help if you're in a group of content creators, that kind of stuff. So let's say that I was doing something, and then I saw that you were posting something live for infra, I could say, hey,
Right.
just my whole page and everybody who's in here, all 7 live viewers, send them Matt's way when I'm done, kind of thing. And it sounds like they're
Right.
removing that soon, which does, again, kind of like remove some of that functionality, that organic, maybe, what would this be called back in the GeoCities days? Is it the link group? It's a linked list, but like, what's the term for those? I've forgotten. I'm getting too old. But anyway, like the circle of websites that are all related to each other. So that functionality used to be there, but that is the community trying to build something in because discoverability doesn't exist. I won't die on this hill, but I do feel like some of these coping mechanisms tell me that there's something wrong with it. Yeah. That's all. That's all I'm trying to say.
So
you want to talk containers?
I do. You forwarded me the latest of the reports for the container report from Datadog.
Yeah. No. Listen,
when did this come out?
It came out last week, and I will, like, full disclosure, I work for Datadog. I'm a bit of a shill. I do like our content when we put it out there. This specifically, when it comes to reports about where clients are using your platform, and you've got a lot of data about things like trends that are happening, serverless report, container report, those kind of things, I find very interesting because they're based on facts, and like a significant portion of people who use stuff. It totally makes sense to me. That being said, there may be conclusions out there that aren't these. I'd love to hear them. So by all means, pop into the chat if you've got something else that we missed or we should be talking about. But I thought it was pretty insightful. And there are a couple points in here that I want to talk about, especially with you, just to see what your pulse check is based on like what you see out there talking to people.
Yeah. Going back to the accuracy of a report like this, I think this is really useful because there was actually another report I'd seen pretty recently from something that starts with / something about
data,
developer developer stuff, and it was a survey of thousands of developers, and they were saying, well, the survey says that these many people this particular thing is more popular. And it was like the problem with surveys is, I mean, if somebody asks me a survey, do I want to say what the stupid things that I really do, or all the good things I keep meaning to do? And I kind of go for, well, I'm not as much of an idiot as I am, so therefore I'm to say this good thing instead of the stupid thing I do now.
Yeah. So how popular was Rust on this report? Is a pretty good one.
Yeah.
It's something that people want to do, but aren't there yet. And it's not that Rust is bad or hard or anything like that. It's just that
it's something
when you self-report. Yeah, exactly. When you self-report, it's a little bit different than
by the time this comes out, it will be true that I will have started using Rust, and I am amazing.
I will say, if even I can understand Rust, I feel like most people can. It's all about.
I still haven't tried it. I'm something I'm going to take on tomorrow.
Fill out the /data report.
But something like this, where it is based on what is actually being seen by Datadog, is pretty interesting. Although not everyone uses Datadog, and so there's more people out there using containers that are not using Datadog than are using Datadog.
Correct.
And
so this is and it has like just knowing Datadog's knowing Datadog's customer sort of mix. So you'd assume like cloud native. So most of these workloads are going to be on the cloud because it's a SaaS product. So it kind of, if there are people using containers on-prem, then that mix might be a little bit different. So there are some like corollaries, I guess, in terms of what you think of people would normally be doing on-prem. But I think some of the I guess the big conclusions are easy. So like the first one is Kubernetes usage for containers is growing. So I guess 5 years ago, maybe 10 years ago now, if you ask people, hey, are you running this on like Docker Swarm or DCOS or something like Mesosphere or Kubernetes, like where are you going with your container orchestration strategy kind of thing? So I think most people will be going towards Kubernetes now, whereas back then it'd be sort of a less mature. It didn't like, there was no stratification, I guess, in the market. So there wasn't like that big, everybody's doing this now. So the other question here, the corollary to me is, if you're not using Kubernetes, what are you doing? Is it Docker Compose and prod? Because I feel like that's it. That's the other answer. But I did want to get your take
I
on
mean,
that.
I think this is, I mean, one thing that's interesting about, Kubernetes usage is rising, I
Right.
think, based on no real data, but I think
Your
that
gut feel.
Kubernetes usage is rising, whether it's the right thing to do or not. I mean, there are some organizations where it just doesn't make sense. If you're
Right.
let's say you're a super small organization and you've got 8 developers, and um, and you're not building a Kubernetes product, but you're
Right.
just building, I don't know, a bunch of WordPress sites. Kubernetes might not be the right solution or maybe it is. I mean, depends on,
I don't know. It could go either way. It really depends on
it
where
could
you
go
are
either
in your
way. I mean,
maturity. Yeah.
are one of your existing developers, do they have Kubernetes experience? Because somebody's got to manage this stuff,
Right.
or are you outsourcing that? And
Or if you
so,
want to go hire someone, just sight unseen, you found someone who wants to join your company, everything
right,
works out. What experience do they have? Is it going to be
right,
EC2 VMs and Red Hat, RHC kind of thing? Or have they just taken a Kubernetes admin course? Like, I actually don't know.
right,
But where,
yeah,
where are they in the maturity level? Have they run
yeah,
Kubernetes in prod previously? And because of that, is it easier to hire more people to help you run
right.
Kubernetes where you are? Maybe, maybe not. But I feel like Kubernetes popularity is certainly on the rise, and where you're
Oh,
going to
absolutely.
run containers, I feel like what I'm hearing at least is definitely on Kubernetes, but I always do wonder what else you could be doing with containers if not.
Yeah. So what else? So there's Kubernetes, and there's the
Yeah,
Kubernetes, I guess, distributions, or whatever
right,
you'd call it. I think OpenShift counts as Kubernetes, right?
right.
And I mean, there's some other Kubernetes types. Then I guess there's Cloud Foundry, which is different.
I
Although there's a lot of Kubernetes in there now, and who knows
Right. I
what.
think they would say Tanzu is kind of the place that they're going. So like the
Okay.
pivotal
Yeah.
kind of whole Cloud Foundry thing, I think is kind of being steered towards Tanzu, which is
Yep.
like the VMware sort of Kubernetes
Right.
offering.
There's obviously Docker and Docker Compose and Swarm. Is Swarm still I think Swarm's still a thing, right?
I think it
I think.
is, though. Did it go to a different company, Mirantis, now? Because Docker
Oh,
kind of had a bit of
Mirantis.
a split,
Right.
right?
Right. And then there's the other container runtime. Oh, is it Rocket? Well, is Rocket still? No, Rocket's not a
Right,
thing anymore, right?
right. So then there
And then
used to
there's,
be Red Hat OpenShift, but that's now
yep,
Kubernetes.
right,
And then there's ECS. So if you're in Amazon, like there's like
right,
Google
sure,
Cloud Run, ECS. I think Azure's got one as well. But the way
yeah,
of just not orchestrating, but saying, hey, the cloud will
right,
take care of it. Just give me a container, which honestly I
right,
think is a pretty mature approach. Actually, at the end of the
yeah.
day,
It's like
I've
Fargate. I
run
mean,
exactly. I've run production
yeah,
workloads in ECS, and I can say that the simplicity of ECS, even though there are
yeah,
some growing pains at the beginning, it's quite nice. Like, hey, just give me a
yeah.
container.
As long
Put
as the
it out there.
magic works, then I'm fine with magic.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So I realize that there's like there's not a lot of info here in the background. There's a lot
yeah,
left unsaid in terms of like where people would be running containers elsewhere.
right.
But I think, to me at least, it's not a surprise that Kubernetes
No,
adoption is increasing
absolutely
as
not a
opposed
surprise.
to decreasing.
And I guess if anything's a surprise, it's how not steep how flat that angle is. From
Right.
just 39% to
Thank you.
50-ish%
Yes.
over the course of 2 years, 2.5 years.
Right. And some of this is that as Datadog grows and gets more clients that are
Yeah.
of different mix, maybe more enterprise or smaller companies, that
Yep.
kind of thing, you'd expect this to skew the graph as well. But it looks like if you look at just that last little tip there, that curve just kind of it's not a
Yeah.
hockey stick, but it's just like the end of the hockey stick. We're just going just
Yeah.
just starting to
Yeah.
trail up. But
Maybe.
you're right. So
Although
where
you could say, if you had looked at the report just before January 2022, it's beginning to do a little hockey stick. Oh, no, it didn't.
Exactly. So is it
Yeah.
that people towards the end of their fiscal goals say that they're going to do something, and as a result have a development? But like some of these are,
Right.
like you've got timing. So I said by the
Right.
end of fiscal, which I think for some companies is November, I would get this done. So because of that, I put a bunch of stuff in dev in October because sometimes things are
Right.
slower in your company, that kind of thing.
And then something that's not super. I think it's one thing about this report, this chart, is it's saying not that 50% of containers are in Kubernetes, but rather 50% of organizations that are running containers have at least one Kubernetes cluster that they are working with.
You got it, but it also counts. So just looking at the subscript, so it counts ECS for an example, which is why it was like top of mind to me. Right. It also talks about like serverless stuff. So if you're running a container, I think Lambda can do that now too, right? If you're running a container as your payload for Lambda, which I think our agent would detect that it's in Containerd or Docker, what have you, we would know that it's outside of Kubernetes. I'm not sure if we're talking about the same thing here, but it does sound like there's a weird mix.
If I'm an organization and I have 1,000 EC2 instances and I've got 10,000 containers, one of those containers is in Kubernetes, then I am one of the
see what you're saying.
You've
been painted up. Now.
It could just be this tiny little bit, and it could be counted.
Sorry, I did
misunderstand. I'm using Kubernetes, okay. So I'm contributing to 50% of Datadog customers are running Kubernetes.
Right. So, sorry. Can you still hear me?
I can. Can you hear me? You went muted. Now you're muted. I cannot hear you anymore. You're muted. You're muted. Now you're unmuted. Can you hear me?
I sure can. So I think what we're measuring here is the appetite for people to try Kubernetes, is what you're saying. So if you've tried
at least one person within the organization to try Kubernetes.
I think I got too excited in my AirPods, just like unsynced from Bluetooth. But yes, I do agree though. So what we're saying is if you've touched Kubernetes once, you will not run away from Kubernetes. I wonder if that's true of my past. Have we tried Kubernetes and not adopted it? I guess I may have been the only person who didn't want to adopt Kubernetes originally in like 2016, back in the day when we did like our bake-off. I don't know if you've done a container organization or orchestration bake-off. If that happened to you at the time. Okay, so we tried Swarm, DCOS, and Kubernetes. And for the record, I actually thought Mesosphere was easier to use for what we were trying to do in terms of the scheduler. We were doing some Spark stuff and things like that, and it just sort of made sense at the time because DCOS had really good Spark and Hadoop and other job systems. Kubernetes at the time,
for the entire lifetime of Kubernetes and Docker, as long as they've been around, I was working at Datadog. So and somebody at Datadog was doing those things, but I was not involved.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. All right, shall we move on to point number 2 here?
We should.
We're like those two Muppets guys in the bleachers. It's like, it's the worst. It's the best. So it's like Twitch reacts to Datadog's container report. So I think the next one here is that like more than 35% of container organizations use serverless container technology. So to tease this apart, similar to we did last time. So if you used a container, period, in your organization, so that's you're considered a container organization if you're using. I mean, there's probably numbers to this. We should be responsible, but let's say like we've determined that you're using containers. You're that level of maturity, or you're that type of organization. In that org, 35% of these people are using serverless. And I thought this number would be a lot larger. Having used serverless and like understood a little bit of
not within that org, 35% are using serverless. This is more than 35% of orgs that are using.
So of all of the companies that we deal with that use containers, 35% of those companies, not like 35 people out of 100 at company X, but 35% of those companies that are using containers, according to Datadog, are also using serverless. I thought,
now what does this mean?
Hit the container level, I think what this means.
What does serverless mean here?
Good point. So there's a lot of people on AWS, so Lambda.
Well, I mean, serverless AWS Lambda, when it spins up, it is running in a container, but AWS doesn't really say that publicly.
Right.
I mean,
I think what we're
we
saying
know
is
that's
like,
how it works.
yeah, I think what we're
But
saying is like,
is
if there's a
that
Venn diagram of people who use serverless and a Venn diagram of container users, that there's an overlap.
right?
And that overlap on the container side, if you're looking through that lens, is 35% of the entire addressable
Sure.
market of
But I'm
container
trying to
users.
understand, is serverless container, does that include Lambda? Because I would not think that it does.
Oh, I
Or
don't think
is
they're
it
saying
more
serverless
talking about
container.
Fargate?
No, I think we're just saying serverless, period. So we're saying like, if you
Serverless.
use containers,
Why is it?
it's not as
Serverless
likely
container.
as you, not serverless containers. If you're using serverless, or
Right.
sorry, if you're using containers, period, then there's a less than 50% chance that you're also using serverless. That's how I read it, which is like, I'm surprised.
But this diagram says serverless containers. Serverless container technology.
I think it's serverless adoption across all clouds. If I read like the thing that it says, more than 35% of container organizations use serverless container technology. You might be right. So it's containers in serverless. So it means Lambda
or
containers
that are. I mean, when I think of serverless and container, I'm thinking Fargate kind of thing, where you don't even have a node that you know about.
Yeah. So you could be in Lambda and you have no idea what's happening, but we know. That happens to be a container.
There's Alon when you need him to explain this stuff.
Exactly. Get Rabinovich in here. Okay, so to me, actually, I thought, listen, if you're already on containers and you've already got the whole build pipeline for all of this running, to me, why would you, because I don't know if you've done like the Python Lambda, like why would you go through this entire, it's like morass of like getting everything into a zip file that Amazon will take so you can put into Lambda? Maybe it's because you were doing it before, but if you've already got stuff in a container image that you can deploy from, I don't know, your registry, why would you not use that in serverless? That's what I'm surprised at. Is like, one, the serverless adoption I thought should be very high, and two, if you're already using a pipeline like this, like why not just use the same thing? But maybe there are reasons. Maybe it's a workflow that already exists or something. I don't know. I just expected this number to be much higher, like closer to parity.
I don't understand that argument.
No? Okay.
I mean, because when working with, I guess it depends on how you're working with serverless. I mean, if you're talking about Lambda,
that could be it. It could be my immaturity when it comes to serverless. Yeah.
So I think that all that stuff is involved if you're using the AWS tools for Lambda. But if you're using the serverless framework, which kind of abstracts it away even further, where you just write a function and then run SLS, whatever, deploy, and like all that's magic stuff happens.
Like serverless TM.
There's magic.
Serverless. Yeah, the one that uses like S3 and all that stuff all bundled together.
Yeah,
I hear you. That totally makes sense. Yeah, and that workflow is actually quite nice. Like you're right, just a little SLS command. Similar to the ECS thing, you just push it up and you're good to go.
Yeah.
Which does make it pretty nice. That's a good point. Yeah. So simplicity. So instead of baking, like doing a Docker build, Docker deploy, what have you, pushing up to the cloud, grabbing from a registry, figuring out your keys and stuff like that.
And there are definitely tools that kind of try to apply that super simple deployment, I guess, methodology for developers and apply it to Kubernetes. Like I think it's Octeto that does something like that, where it just like makes it super easy to deploy to Kubernetes, where you don't have to think about all the containers and stuff. As a developer, you just build your application, and it's like magic.
When I first read this, I thought the takeaway was like people using OpenFast, so people in Kubernetes building their own serverless.
Yeah, so serverless on like OpenFast or Knative or those types of technologies.
Right, like a trigger mesh or something like that. Yeah, you got it. Yeah.
So reading this diagram, I have more questions about what exactly are they talking about.
More questions than answers.
Yeah.
All right, moving on. The other one here is multi-cloud adoption by organization size. So basically, listen, I realize a podcast, if you're not on YouTube, it's like more of a an audible kind of thing, and even on here we're not sharing screen or anything, but basically it's saying as time progresses and as companies get larger, more and more companies are using more cloud providers. So if your organization is 300 as opposed to 3,000 or 30,000, you'd be more likely to use more clouds the more people they are. And I think, to me, again, this seems like a no-brainer, because my enterprise experience is, if there's something out there that somebody can pay for, the larger you get, you will buy all of the things at least once. So it feels to me like, having been in like a multi-cloud org, that was pretty large. We were in all of the clouds because each department would have something, or each division, or some product manager somewhere, or some developer somewhere would do something else. Like, there would be stuff everywhere. So all three of the clouds, easy. And then maybe some in the IBMs, the Oracles. I think there was a Dell cloud at one point in time, like all of the clouds.
Right. And I mean, I remember this through the progress of Datadog. I mean, in the beginning, it was just AWS. Everything on inside Datadog was just on AWS. There might have been some Azure just to develop out the plugins, the integrations, but gradually all the clouds started getting used for different types of things inside the company. I wonder if I can add a screen share so I can actually show the diagram that we're talking about.
This is next level.
How would I do that?
I would do it, but unfortunately I don't have I think you have to hit present. I'm only on one monitor today. I'm working hard here.
Present.
But I think maybe the graphs are a little bit more interesting than talking about them.
Slides.
You think people would rather look at the graph than your pretty face? Come on.
I don't know. Maybe, your computer.
Like massive mug.
PowerPoint, upload file. Where did I save this to? Downloads.
It's an early recommendation for this week is to get the largest size Yeti mug that you can. Look at this thing. It's I think they were buy one get one free or something. It's as large as that.
Well, it's processing, and then we'll bring this up. But I mean, this makes sense, because a small organization, you're not going to have lots of clouds unless you are in the business of working with all those clouds.
Right. Also, I feel like in a small organization, it's harder to get like budget for like a cloud expenditure. Once you do, you tend to stick there. There's also the concept of like approved vendors. I don't know if you've seen that in like the small to medium org. So getting like a new vendor approved in order to go through paying a vendor can be difficult as well. So getting through those.
Look at this.
Oh, we're like a real YouTube channel now.
We might,
we can talk about stuff now. And I feel like as I worked for companies that were larger and larger, we did in fact use a lot more technology, and it would look like more code bases, more databases, more clouds, of course. So this to me tracks, and I'm glad to hear it does to you as well.
Yeah.
Now, so the dark purple is what we're talking about. The light purple is the fact that most organizations, regardless of size, are still single cloud primarily.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you see that part. So the corollary, like the opposite of this, is like, hey, also, there are some orgs that just stay single cloud. And in fact, it's the overwhelming majority. So we're not in the multi-cloud phase here. And I feel like some of this might be that they don't understand that they actually do have multiple clouds in the background, but like what they're running on is a single cloud. And because of that, they're like Datadog's not deployed in all locations, that kind of stuff.
Right.
But specifically, it sounds like to me that when we're looking at production workloads for clients that we have, they are generally on a single cloud. And that's kind of interesting to me as well, because I feel like running multiple clouds in production, like a multi-cloud kind of thing, is complicated. It's quite complicated.
Yes.
And it feels like to me, a lot of what the clouds were like cordoned off. There's the siloed off into different departments, and they may have their own monitoring technology, or they may not be monitoring. It might be a test environment. Azure Active Directory is one of those ones that we used in Azure, and I think DNS in China, for example, is one of the things that we used Azure for at a previous company. And we used Google for some stuff. I think it was Cloud SQL that we used it for, specifically for some Gmail stuff. But most of our prod workloads were in AWS. And in fact, I don't believe we monitored either of those other two clouds. At least the way it affected me, we didn't monitor. So we only monitored AWS. So I feel like that story is also one of those ones that's out there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's easier if the different clouds are being used for different workloads. If you're using it for the same, just multiple copies of the same workload.
Right.
I mean, yeah, the virtual machine technology, the virtual machines that are in the cloud, whether it's an AWS instant or a Google compute, whatever.
Yep.
I mean, those parts are the same, but all the other things that you need, they're all configured differently. Like load balancers are going to be, and creating one Terraform thing that deploys to both AWS and Google and Azure. I mean, because you got to deal with all the other connection pieces, it's hard.
Yeah. I don't know if you've ever been in like a cloud migration sort of thing where you try to say like, hey, if we're going to move this workload over to this cloud, what would that workflow look like? It's quite difficult. So back in the day, we were looking at like AWS to Giant of all places. Like what would, if we were going from AWS to Giant, what would that look like? And if, funnily enough, like what you're talking about, the moving VMs side to side, not too bad. Containers wasn't too bad. It came down to us, at least, networking was quite complicated. So things like where do the SSL certs terminate? Do they terminate on the box, on the load balancer? There was a lot of discussion about that, and like how does that look like? Oh, does the load balancer behave the same way? Was another one that we got, because they were just a little bit different in Giant than they were elsewhere. And then deciding whether or not we needed to like re-architect while moving was another thing. Eventually, we didn't move anything. Not that there was anything wrong with Giant, but it turned out that yes, the feature parity between clouds is there, but just migrating across is not as simple as you think. So to me, the multi-cloud adoption kind of tracks.
Does Datadog still have that? There, I know there was a page on the Datadog site that basically gave 3 columns of for AWS and Google and Azure, and what are all the things called, and it was like a dictionary of all the clouds and all the services, and it was like a top level page on Datadog, not in the app, but on the more marketing side of the web page.
Yeah, it's sad because I didn't know we had this, but yes, in fact, we do still have this. It's called the Cloud Providers Services Comparison, which actually does go through them all. So yeah, it's still there, and I've done this before. I've looked at pages like this, like trying to figure out like, okay, so why didn't they say this? Do they mean this?
Yeah.
The one that gets me is Azure all the time. Is talking about PaaS, like platform as a service, and SQL Server somehow is a PaaS. And it always confuses me. How is SQL a platform? But it is. Let's move on. Let's like figure out where these line up, kind of thing. But yes, it's still there, and I'll try to put that into the links as well.
Okay, cool.
Sure we've got those for this week. All right, should we check out the next one? What do we got?
The next one. Kubernetes ingress usage is on the rise. What? Yeah.
What is a Kubernetes ingress, Matt?
Kubernetes ingress is how you're going to get be able to connect to something that's on the Kubernetes. I mean, as an end user using perhaps a website, let's say it's a website that is hosted on Kubernetes, you're going to need some sort of ingress to get to that web server.
That's what I thought as well, which is why this confused me. So the question would be, the corollary here would be, if you're
I mean, it does. I mean, a website is a website is if the thing that's trying to get information is a human, but maybe it's some sort of API that's on the other side, hosted on Kubernetes.
Right.
Yeah. I don't understand why this is. Why did they dedicate the space to this fact?
Right. So I feel like what's actually happening is is it like an ingress controller as opposed to a container? Is that the difference? Right. So ingress provided through an ingress controller as opposed to a container like Nginx taking the ingress. That's how I read it, but I could be wrong because this one honestly confused me a little bit. So what is the
Yeah.
Kubernetes ingress? Oh,
I mean,
there
are
is a
we
web
talking
page for
about?
this. Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's what's
Yeah.
yeah.
I'll send it to you. So you get it. We can pull it up here. So I feel like this
Are we
is one of
doing
the
it in
ones
the
where we should
private
actually
chat
look at
or?
the real report. Yeah, I'll just pop into the private chat here on StreamYard. So it's this,
There we go.
that website there.
Okay.
And then when we look at ingress in here, as opposed to on the thing, let's see what we see.
We're on fact number 4. Okay. Okay.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
So
it
is
is
it
in fact
more talking about?
It's the ingress.
So this is
controller.
more talking about using an ingress controller versus multiple load balancers.
Yeah, like a daemon
Right.
set of like Nginx containers that
I mean,
would
if you
listen to a certain port and put things off into the thing. I think what may be even more confusing is I believe the ingress controller can be used with different load balancers. Yeah.
Right.
So whereas previously you'd use like an ALB in Kubernetes on AWS. Am I reading this wrong?
I mean, well, one of the problems, I mean, if you use just if you've got Kubernetes on any of the platforms and you've got some service that requires some sort of ingress, the cloud will often spin up a load balancer. And that load balancer across all the different clouds is usually like $10 or $15 a month that you're paying just for that ingress, or just for that load balancer.
Right.
And if you can have a single load balancer that sends all the data through that one load balancer to an ingress controller that then splits all those different requests out to all the different services, now you've just saved yourself, potentially a lot of money, because it's all going through that one load balancer, or maybe a few load balancers, but 2 or 3 versus 200 or 300.
Okay.
Load balancers.
And yeah, so when we were talking earlier about the differences between load balancers for different clouds kind of thing, this might be one of the ones that comes up. The other thing is that the ingress controller can in fact be used with something like Nginx. I just pulled it up just to make sure I wasn't wrong, because some of these things are a little bit newer to me. I think 118 was the last version I really dove into, and this came out in 119. So I feel like I might have missed the boat here. But we'll get to that later as well. It's like the knowledge of Kubernetes and like how things it advances at a pretty fast pace. And I think the fact that both of us were a little bit behind here on this one is a bit telling as well. But yeah, it looks like the ingress controller. Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's saying ingress is a weird way of saying it's a confusing way of saying it. Kubernetes ingress controller, okay, but ingress just, I mean, it's, even if you're using a load balancer, the data is still coming in. It's an ingress versus egress. And it's like,
it's a generic term, right?
More data is coming inside of Kubernetes. Like, oh, is that what you're? But looking at the description, that has nothing to do with what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think we got there in the end. But yeah, it may be that the slides that we're looking at or require some notes, whereas the website has a little bit more precision about what's actually going on. So I did look it up, and 1.19 was in fact released August 26th, 2020. So it was released probably the year this report first came out. And then we've been tracking it ever since. So at the time, it was a big change. And I totally get that. And because of that, we've been tracking the change adoption through time. So if we're talking about, like, let's say, yes, it's 25% here. So from 25% to roughly 35% over the course of 2 years for something pretty big, it looks like it has not changed as much as we expected, in fact, or as much as you would expect for something that could potentially be a lot less complicated and also cheaper.
It is. Did you say a lot less complicated? No, it's complicated. Setting up
if you're multi-cloud, though.
Can be. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I hear you.
This can be complicated stuff, and if the cloud provider is going to handle all the hard stuff for you by just automatically spinning up a load balancer, yes, it costs an extra $10, $12, $15 a month, but they're dealing with all that for you, and that means I don't have to learn about spinning up. I mean, for if somebody is, I mean, it depends on the experience level. There are people that are being thrust into Kubernetes without much background. They haven't taken, Brett Fisher's Kubernetes course on, was it
Right.
Udemy or Pluralsight or one of those, and or any of the other courses, and they're just like, well, how do I do? How do I do this stuff?
Right.
If you don't know anything, let AWS or DigitalOcean or whatever spin up that load balancer to do that part for you. It costs a bit, but yeah.
So in fact, there are ways of using what's called the AWS ALB ingress controller, which I think is, it's been renamed as the AWS load balancer controller. So it looks like there is an ingress controller that can use an ALB. This is what I thought, like the waters are a little bit muddy, right? So we may be able to set up an ingress controller using an ALB using like EKS create. It looks like.
And for like DigitalOcean, you cannot have a single load balancer for multiple services inside Kubernetes. If you spin up multiple services, each one of those gets a dedicated load balancer within DigitalOcean. And I think it's same for some of the others as well.
Gotcha. Yeah, I know at least in Azure as well, I used to set up different load balancers for different endpoints and private IPs as well. So it looks like EKS CTL can in fact do this. So that also makes sense if you're using it. Anyway, we should move on.
Right. We should move on. We've gone four topics in 40 minutes.
Oh, well, this can be the longest podcast ever.
So, Istio and Linkerd are the most popular service mesh technologies. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I don't think most people know of other service mesh options.
That's what I wanted to say, which is so unfortunate, but absolutely true. When you talk to people about service meshes, they will say Istio or Linkerd. And there are others out there, listen, but yes, this was not surprising to me. I think the fact that if you look at the actual line, it says percentage of Kubernetes organizations using mesh. So most organization, again, based on just these two charts that we see here, you may infer that most organizations are in fact not using a service mesh, unless there's a whole bunch of them out there at like 1% that make up the rest of this. But I would assume that's not the case.
So the other popular ones being, so Console is a service mesh, AWS App Mesh.
I have not used that.
Cilium,
there's also Open Mesh, Cilium,
Open Mesh, Traffic Mesh, and Kuma.
Traffic, yeah. Yeah, so there's quite a few.
Okay. Yeah.
And then again, like the question is whether or not they're using that as some other type of ingress. Like it gets a little bit complicated, I think, in terms of the way that you're working internally.
Yeah, I think for when we used to use when Datadog in the training group used to use Katacoda, they were using Cilium for, I think it was Cilium for its service mesh.
That totally makes sense.
But
all right,
they went away. Okay, next one. Yeah, this totally makes sense. Most hosts run Kubernetes versions that are more than 18 months old. Yeah, totally.
Now, what do you think the contributing factor is here? Like, I know it's pretty small, but can you zoom in? Like, what is that version that most people are running? Because I think that's the last version I deployed. Now, listen, I don't have a lot of experience with 121, but that is the last version that maybe 122, but like one of those two versions are the last ones that I've deployed, period, which is sad. So I haven't deployed a new version of Kubernetes in over 10 months. Like easy, I haven't, which is like super sad. But I haven't touched new APIs in
I wonder
10 months.
How many? So what? I would have thought that more hosts are running on a managed Kubernetes therefore, is this talking about I'm installing Kubernetes myself, and therefore
No,
I
it's
am
monitored. So imagine you've just set up EKS. The question is, a new version of Kubernetes comes out. What do you do on your end? Sorry to like put you on a pedestal here, but like, how do you get to the new version? That's the question. So I think the assumption that I'm hearing from what you're saying is like, hey, if it's managed, the control plane will be auto updated as it comes out.
right.
But what I've noticed is that that is certainly the expectation, but I don't think that's how it plays out in most
Hmm.
like managed providers. That being said, the separation of node groups into like a Kubernetes cluster
Yeah.
seems to make things a little bit easier.
Right.
But you will be
I
doing
know.
like a
So
new,
I've been.
probably a new deployment. You won't be doing like a migration,
Yeah.
right? You won't be upgrading Kubernetes to a new
Right.
version. You'll be deploying a new cluster.
Yeah. I I haven't really been dealing with AWS in a while.
Gotcha.
But for DigitalOcean, and I think for Sivo as well,
Yeah.
there's like an option that says, well, when do you want to update, versions of Kubernetes? Do you want to
Gotcha.
do the updates on, on Sundays and automatically do it? And it's like, yeah, just
Interesting.
auto update.
You just like full dev in prod. Let's go.
Yeah. I mean, that's an option. Or you can, at any time, if you feel now is the time to update, then go ahead and so there's like is the update process is click a checkbox and then click another checkbox when you want to return to the previous version when you realize you just screwed everything up.
And I'm just pulling up like the ones that aren't supported anymore. So end of life for 122 was October 28th. And that was 14 months ago.
Yeah.
So anything prior to that is end of life, which is like a whole other thing. You don't want to be end of life on something that you're running in prod for sure. And there's a lot. Like if you look past that, most of this graph, just I'm doing some napkin math here, but like this looks like most people are on an unsupported version of Kubernetes in the scope of what Datadog monitors. So that the question would be, how do we make it easier for people to upgrade Kubernetes? Or I think there was also talk in the community about like a Kubernetes LTS or like a longer release cycle, so it like stays around longer. I don't know where that got to. I recall seeing the discussion, but I think that's the other part of this is like, hey, how do we make a release that is 18 months old not be end of life? Because the sad reality seems to be that people are keeping them around. And I do wonder if you do that, does that just mean that they then wait 3 years or like the Windows schedule of like people are still running Windows Server 2008, for example? Like, what does that look like? How long do we need to be? What's the right sizing here?
Wow. And then related to this,
folks.
Yeah. Related to this, 30% of hosts running Container D use an unsupported version.
Yeah.
So, I mean, related to it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that also doesn't surprise me. Having seen, and this is maybe more on the Docker side, but having seen organizations struggle with just updating Docker, yeah, I can see this being a problem for sure.
Yeah.
And some of this is the underlying host as well. Like if you only want to use the packages that the vendor that your chosen vendor has gone with, you don't want to use anything different than that. It's possible.
Now, I wonder if so it doesn't say where these things are running, where these hosts and clusters are actually running. Are these the clusters that are up on AWS and Azure and Google that are running production workloads, or does this also include the clusters that are running on a developer's workstation that are using Minikube or something else? In which
so to make
case,
that a little bit easier, it'd be stuff that Datadog monitors, right? So if it's on your workstation,
Yeah.
you'd have to have the Datadog agent installed to auto-discover Container D you're running. On top of which, if it's Container D, I think you'd be running Linux. I don't know if you could do Container D on Windows. You may be able to do it on Mac, but it's probably Linux. And it would be monitored by Datadog. So for me, I feel like the big thing that we're hearing here is that like you've gone to a CRI compliant runtime, Container D. You're running it probably on a Linux host. It could be on-prem, could be in the cloud, could be anywhere. we're monitoring that host or we're monitoring that container specifically. And out of those that are out there, the entire like addressable containerd install base that Datadog sees is out of date. And again, sort of doesn't surprise me, even though it's unfortunate.
Yeah. So I was reading the details.
Getting the actual facts, good.
And I might have skipped ahead, but there was something that used the term serverless container technologies. It's like, oh, there's that thing. Well, now that I have the details, let me scroll back up to that 35% of container organizations use serverless container technologies. And here in the details, it does say, no, it is not talking about serverless as in like Lambda. It's specifically talking about Fargate and Azure Container Apps.
Oh no! Okay, well at least we self-corrected live.
Azure Container
We don't have to release a public apology or anything.
Yeah. So tools like Fargate have grown in popularity across all the.
Gotcha.
Okay. But one of the benefits of using something like Fargate is that, with EKS, they're running the control plane, but it's up to you to say when to update the control plane to the newest version. But with Fargate, you just run your containers, and they're going to update the control plane whenever they feel like.
All right.
And you have no control over. Well, you might have a little control, but at some point they're just going to update.
But your scope of responsibility is updating the container. So republishing newer versions of the container and pulling them down.
And so the description of this particular slide is suggesting that that might be a reason why there is a shift to serverless containers across all clouds, because they don't have to deal with containerd runtime versus, or as well as the cluster version. They don't have to deal with it because Fargate, AWS is taking care of it all.
That's awesome.
Reading, fundamental.
I know, who knew? That's why we need 3 people, so like 2 of us can talk while the other person just quickly checks the facts.
While the other person has a hand to slap us across the face when we say things stupid.
You're wrong.
Oh, thanks. The dog was delivered to my office.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Hey, Jay, do you want to be on the podcast? No.
Didn't answer.
Okay. She went away. Next one.
Now, I feel like this slide should be flipped the other way around. So more organizations are securing their clusters with RBAC properly, as opposed to less organizations are misconfiguring RBAC. But I do get the point. So like as RBAC adoption has become essentially default, I believe default for all 3 cloud providers. RBAC is a default for EKS, AKS, and GKE. When people adopted it, instead of it just like everything's open in RBAC, instead of doing that as they move forward, they started to start locking it down. For me, I think this has to do somewhat with the tooling. So the RBAC tooling seems to be a little bit lagging behind. So I was using something called Popeye at the time to tell me about like security issues in my clusters. But when I would talk to people about Popeye, it's one of the tools that the author of K9S made, which I really love K9S. So for me, I also use Popeye, and it had some integration, which made things really nice. But at the time, there weren't a lot of tools out there to tell me if something was too permissive or less permissive. And I think within Datadog as well, perhaps we didn't necessarily have something ready at launch either to talk about those permissions, whereas we do now in terms of security.
Yeah, there's not only the tools not available to show if things are overly permissive, but there's also not really great tools to lock it down to make it easier to assign those roles. Gosh, wouldn't it be great if there was a tool that could do something? Who could have? Oh, it's the company I work for. Hey.
There's also the fact that like people
Yeah.
aren't used to like, okay, so if you're not auditing, right? So let's say
Yeah.
there is a tool and like, yes, we should all do this. We don't. There's no actual schedule to run the audit
Yeah.
internally from. Unfortunately, there's going to be like a security team or at least people wearing that hat
Right.
once in a while, every 3 months, every month, maybe every quarter, every half year, every full year,
Yeah.
kind of thing where you're running the audit. And then you're getting results back and they're saying, hey, like the CIS benchmark is here and we're here. We need to
Right.
get there kind of thing. There's no, like, if you're not testing it, you don't know what's going on, that kind of thing. So I think at least on our website, we do describe this a little bit better in terms of what we should do. But like the conclusion here, I think, is that there's still,
I mean, I think this is
40% of them are still misconfigured, right? Like there's a lot of
and this is a
opportunity there.
weird, it's a weird chart because I mean, I think, you know, if in 2019 there were, let's say that there were 5 clusters,
Right.
and 2 of them had RBAC enabled, and now there are 10 clusters, and there's now 3.
Right.
It's the number of people that have taken are dealing with RBAC has grown,
Right.
but percentage of all the clusters has gone down because most people don't think about RBAC.
But still, 40%. It's not 50, but it's like a little less than half of people.
Yeah,
still have RBAC.
I'm actually kind of surprised it's as high as it is because it's hard.
But I see. You think they're okay. I thought the opposite. So for me, I was thinking like SE Linux. Like how long did it take SE Linux to be adopted? And I feel like it's still not completely adopted now, and it's been a long time.
Yeah.
Like I don't think when you talk to people that they automatically will tell you about permissive roles and things like that in SE Linux.
Mhm.
And because of that, I feel like this also, though it may be decreasing, like this is going to like flatten out around 10%,
Right.
and just go on in perpetuity, where there's just 10% of all of the Kubernetes users everywhere will just never secure RBAC properly. And if I've seen anything from my past, go ahead.
Yeah. To do RBAC right within your organization, it's a hard thing to do.
You need a tool. I'm a
You
company
need
like infra.
Well, okay, even without infra.
But you do need something.
I mean, because you need to define the roles that are right for your organization. You need to create the certificates that represent each user who is going to be accessing Kubernetes. And then you need to create those role bindings that join those two things together. And creating those certificates is not super hard. There's a really cool script from Brendan Burns. I get Brendan Burns and Brendan Gregg mixed up, but it's Brendan Burns, I think. He's got a script that will generate that certificate and generate the kubeconfig file. He was one of the founders for Kubernetes. Now he's a corporate vice president for Microsoft.
Yes.
And I think we talked about this before, but
I'm a big fan of Brendan Burns, so yeah, it's possible.
He that will create the user, although there is no user in Kubernetes. So it'll create the user and the certificate around that, but that you still have to do the role binding, and then ideally you want to update those certificates every quite often. People will often not update them for 10 years or 5 years or forever, when you really should be updating them every 5 minutes or 10 minutes. But then distribution of those certificates is really hard. Now that is the whole piece that infra really takes care of, is creating those certificates and updating them quickly, and do the role binding, so that it's really easy. infrahq.com. Boom.
Listen, plug is appreciated here, because I think when it comes to even just folder permissions and group permissions, if you're going like way back, or if you're even looking at present in something like Google Drive, people don't get group permissions versus individual permissions. So user certificate and permissions, maybe user to a role, and then certificates. Like, no, I can see this just not. Like, it's a non-starter, right?
It is really hard to do. And then, I mean, even if you get all that certificates created, then distribution of those files so that you've got that kubeconfig file on each person's desktop and not the same kubeconfig file, but a
That's
unique
right.
one for each user,
That's right.
is hard. It's, I mean, you can't just rsync, or I don't know, that you can't doing the, it's hard.
Do you remember the early days with Kubernetes? Because everybody would have the same kubectl, and it would be like,
yeah, I mean, everybody downloads the
root,
same,
basically. Yeah,
everybody has
awesome.
domain at, or was it
whatever you want to call
admin?
it,
No.
like full permission, root level access
cluster
to the
admin.
entire cluster.
Cluster admin.
Cluster
Yeah.
admin. Yep. That's beautiful.
Yeah, I'm surprised it's this high.
Fair enough.
Or this low. I'm surprised it's this low. Most people I would imagine would have overly permissive privileges, which is asking for problems.
Yeah, totally agree. All right, what else we got? I think the last two are the same, but there's a difference between the running container. So like, let's just assume like container image versus stateful set image. So these are, I think they're all the same. I didn't really pay too much attention. Is Calico in the next one? It's not. So there's something that replaces Calico, and it's not Mongo. You got GitLab. Is GitLab in state? It is. Oh, is it not? Oh, is it GitLab? Might be GitLab. It could be GitLab. Okay. So, most popular kind of, this is like the who's who of open source. Like if you're building something as a platform engineer, what do you reach out for? I think most of us in terms of databases would probably reach out to Postgres. In terms of caching, same thing, you probably look at Reddit. If you're looking for a queue, chances are it's RabbitMQ. Something open source with search, again, we're still using Elasticsearch, again, going down the thing, right? So Kafka, Vault, etc. These are kind of the who's who list of what's out there. What I found interesting is the stateful set stuff. So early on in the Kubernetes days, it was sort of like, you don't want to put things that require state into Kubernetes. And then I think it was called pet sets for a little bit. And then stateful sets kind of came after that because we didn't want pets. And then they're like, oh, but wait, state isn't necessarily a pet. State's a thing.
Right.
You need state to run a company. Let's come up with stateful sets. And again, if I got this wrong, let me know. You can at me on Twitter. But what I find interesting is that there are a lot of what we would consider things that have state running in Kubernetes. And then again, like the amount of these containers running out there are kind of like the who's who list of what you'd expect.
Right.
I do want to know about the people who are running Jenkins without, is it stateless Jenkins? Like how that works? Because it is a little bit complicated to get Jenkins running that way, but otherwise I think there's not a lot of surprises in here.
Yeah.
Was there anything on this list that like, were you looking for like a MariaDB? Because I thought Maria might be a little bit higher in this list, or at least on MySQL. No?
I cannot say I've ever looked for MariaDB, but
I've certainly used it. Okay. But I was surprised. Oh, it is on this list. Sorry, it's right after Mongo. My apologies. MySQL's in there. And I'm assuming that we're treating both the same. Yeah. So just before Calico and just after Mongo, I expected to see MySQL. But I think on the next graph, is MySQL in the stateful sets? Looking through, don't see it. Which is also kind of interesting to me. But again, I digress. Are there any things that you thought would be on this list that aren't here?
No.
All right, no surprises.
I'm surprised that Datadog is not the most popular container.
That is actually a pretty good point.
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, if it's,
I wonder
if it's, or they just removed. Okay, let's remove Datadog because everybody.
This is one of the ones where we
this,
should check the blog. Was Datadog removed from this list? It doesn't say, but I would assume you're right that it should be.
Yeah,
the top
because
like
everybody's going to have
right?
it.
Exactly.
100%. Yeah. Oh, you're using Datadog. 100% of Datadog customers use Datadog. Oh.
Whoa.
Incredible.
I love it.
I
The
can't
other
think of
was
anything else.
Nginx was on the stateful sets list. I was trying to figure out what state you're using in Nginx that you'd want to persist.
So Nginx Nginx is used for caching, load balancing, and proxy.
Is it
within
but what would you
Kubernetes.
use stateful? Would you have a running config that you change that you would want to
Yeah,
save?
maybe.
Right. So like imagine you're putting a PVC to like a container and you're running it. I guess I just don't know that workflow. I'll have to look into it. What you would want to save and persist in Nginx as you launch new containers. Sockets, something? I don't know. I'll look into it. But I was surprised Nginx was on the list of stateful sets. That is it. What'd you think?
I thought that was pretty cool.
All right.
How do I remove from studio? No, I want to remove. There we go.
Remove yourself.
Yeah. Oh, that I just see the backspace.
Yeah. Now we can see the whole.
Oh, yeah. We got. I got space here.
This lights up. Yeah. You know, a little bit early.
There we go. Oh, we've got all these other options here. Yeah, I can do.
Woo! Now it's Matt's turn.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you have any checkouts or anything that you watched?
I did. So I did. Last week you talked about the peripheral. Is it the peripheral or peripheral?
The peripheral, I believe.
I just started. Tony and I just started watching that a couple nights ago, and it was pretty awesome. I love it.
All right. I'm glad to hear you like it. I would highly recommend the book, though I do think the series on its own stands alone, and it's perfectly fine if that's where you want to stop. The book was chock full of just new words for me. It was like a lexicon of just newness. It was awesome. I was on Google the entire time I read the book. And I listened to the book. So listening to a bunch of new words and then trying to Google them when you don't know how to spell them is super fun. And then I listened to it again because there was a lot. There's a lot going on, let alone the plot, which is fairly complex. But also, the things that they're talking about, because there's a lot of new tech involved. I think Gibson tries to think ahead. And because of that, there was a lot going on. I'm glad to hear you like it. I thought the acting was really good too.
What time period does do they live on, and what year is today in the book? Is it in the
I don't want to spoil it too much, but assume it's 2016.
Okay.
That's the period they're living in.
Okay.
If you're on the first episode, you haven't got, I can say the word because you don't know what it means yet, but when you understand what the jackpot is, and when you think back to what happened in 2017, or 2016, 2017, maybe 2015, around that era.
So was it written? When was it written?
I believe it was written just slightly before that. The peripheral, I can Google pretty quickly. So 2014. Yeah, so it was like near future.
Okay.
It just off into the present. So imagine a future when. And again, I won't spoil it, but like the jackpot involves a whole bunch of stuff. And there are things happening even in 2014, and he researched this stuff for a while. So even prior to then, that he would have known about that could lead to things that like literally did happen in the real world, as well as like different scenarios that happened in the book. And again, like once you've got a few episodes in, we can talk about this again. But I'd love to to debrief because there's a lot going on, and I do really like it. One of those things where it makes you think after watching it, which I really like. I'm glad to hear you liked it.
Yeah. No, the other thing that I just started getting into, I kind of got into for a while. Just this is a software tool on my Mac. Got into it for a while, but then it hit a wall because it didn't do one specific thing. So for a long time, for a long time, I've used a tool called Alfred on the Mac.
Right.
For launching apps, launching everything. And it's got all these workflows in it. In fact, in order to get workflows, you needed to get the Plus or Alfred,
which I paid for,
sponsor pack or whatever. And I was actually in the first. I was one of the first 2 or 3 people in the world on the planet to get the Power Pack. Because awesome. He was experimenting with payment, and I was like the first person to pay money. Right. So I've been using it since the very beginning.
And part of that was Quicksilver, which you were probably using as well, right?
I don't know if it was. I don't know. I don't know what it was. I think there was something else. There was something after Quicksilver that I was using instead. Gotcha. But Raycast has been around for a while, for a couple months, 2 or 3, maybe a year. And I was using Raycast for a little while, but I have to have Alfred as well. I needed Raycast and Alfred, mostly because Alfred had a better clipboard manager, and I could just double tap I think I used it for the Option key or Alt key. I could double tap that key and it would bring up the clipboard manager. And Raycast said, we don't do double tap of any key. That is not a keyboard shortcut that works inside of Raycast. Until 2 days ago, or 3 days, or recently, 3 or 4 days ago, they finally like, oh my God, there's double tap. My life has changed. And
that's
now
cool though. When you find software that like literally changes what you do all day, every day. Yeah, that's a big deal.
And so software tools change as long as So I'm very excited about Raycast finally supporting double tap, and now I can use them. I'll get rid of Alfred, I think, because there's a lot of stuff you can do with Raycast.
And you haven't tried LaunchBar, right? Not to further muddy the waters here.
LaunchBar,
because that's what I've been
ancient.
No,
isn't that ancient?
Old. It's been around for a while. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And I think if you're a Windows user, Launchy is kind of the other one on the Windows.
That was the one I was using before Alfred, and then there was one on Windows that I was using for a long time, which
was it Launchy? Does that sound right? That's what I was using.
No, I feel like there was another one that I know the one developer for it. He was he was a Microsoft employee while I was building it, and it was pretty popular. I can't remember what it was called though.
We'll have to put in the show notes. But launchers are a big thing. Productivity, increaser for sure.
Yeah. And you got any tips? Any picks?
I've never seen Johnny Mnemonic, or had never seen Johnny Mnemonic.
Yeah.
There are some pieces of media that I've just like put aside. This looks silly now. I might like it later on in life. I had no idea. Ice-T and Henry Rollins, Johnny Mnemonic.
Because is that Keanu Reeves as well?
Yeah, Keanu Reeves. Yeah. I really enjoyed it. It's super campy now. Maybe it was good then. Maybe it was also campy then. But I really got a lot out of it. I think a lot of people have probably seen it already. But for me, it was kind of a discovery. I really liked it. I also watched Spiderhead on Netflix, which I would recommend all the way up to the end. And then maybe wouldn't necessarily recommend the ending. But it had Chris Hemsworth in it, who I thought, was impeccably dressed. Whoever was his stylist on this set, great. He does the pharmaceutical kind of founder look to a T, and it was really good. But I thought Spiderhead was quite good.
What was another one that was like Johnny Mnemonic that I felt like came around the same time?
Lawnmower Man?
Lawnmower Man was fun. But no. I don't remember.
Memory's failing us.
Yeah. You know that program, it had, the last time you were able to, I could just say, it had a blah-da-da. And you'd
Listen, I still think it's Lawnmower Man, but we'll see. What else came out? Was it Edward Scissorhands? I'm just trying to think what other movies that were in that wheelhouse of stuff. Because generally I watch most of those kind of sci-fi, futuristic kind of movies. I will, even if they're campy, I'll watch them. Johnny Mnemonic was one of the few that I've never seen. Like Hackers, Sneakers, War Games. I had also left Hackers until 2 years ago. I watched it and really, really liked it again. Super campy.
Yeah.
None of those ones?
No.
Classic sci-fi?
I'm scrolling through. Not seeing anything. Oh, well. Lawnmower Man. Yeah, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I was thinking more of cyberpunk stuff. I think I'm on a bit of a cyberpunk kick.
Yeah.
But just in terms of not the game, but the genre. Because I realized just how much I do actually like it. So I'm kind of going through all the history and everything else that's out there. I'm realizing that there are spots that I've missed, blanks. Yeah, but that's it for me.
Yeah.
Please go watch
Okay.
your Netflix Spiderhead movie and Johnny Mnemonic if you've not seen it.
Johnny
Definitely
Mnemonic.
a
Yeah, that
delightful
was
romp.
yeah. I feel like I should watch Johnny Mnemonic again.
It was pretty fun. The
I
acting
might have
was
seen it in the
awful.
theaters.
Keanu Reeves is not a great actor in that movie at all.
Oh, okay. In that
Laughably
movie?
bad.
Okay. Yeah.
Laughably
Oh,
bad.
okay.
In general, listen, I'm not going to disparage his activities here. I'm not a great actor either, but he's certainly been in a couple movies where I thought he acted pretty well. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, isn't that Keanu as well?
Yeah. Great movie. All the first two were great. The third one was
does
powerful.
not hold up. Recently watched the first one, does not hold up at all.
Yeah. And then of course Point Break.
Which I still have not seen, and I've not seen the
that-
remake
that's
because I think there's a remake. But yeah, Point Break is one of those ones that like is on my list to see. I like
that is a great one.
you know, keeping little nuggets that I can just discover years later.
Right.
I don't feel like I need to see Point Break. There's nothing groundbreaking in it, but I know a lot of people really like the movie.
Yep. Yeah, Johnny Mnemonic. Yeah. I'm looking through. Oh yeah, there's a bunch of bad movies he's been in. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, sorry, Keanu. Some stinkers.
Cool.
Yeah.
All
right.
We're at an hour and 20 minutes. It's our longest.
Not too bad. I think we've only been streaming for an hour and 16 because we had a bit of a late start. So.
Okay. Yeah. Right.
1.25.
And we've managed to retain our entire audience of 2 people the entire time.
What is one of those me? Like, what are the LinkedIn numbers?
I'm assuming.
Next week, let's talk about the
I'm
LinkedIn
1
numbers.
and you're 2.
Yeah, exactly. let's do a recap of our LinkedIn performance next week and see how well that.
Okay.
This is our new market, untapped.
Yeah. All right.
All right, Matt. Shall we find the end stream button?
Well, let's look around for